Hello, my name is Douglas Husic. I'm a second year grad student and teaching assistant for Wayne State University. I debated for Wayne State in my undergrad and participated in state during high school for policy debate for West Bloomfield High School. What you're about to watch is a demo debate put on by me and one of my students for the 2021-2022 high school resolution that's focused on the protection of water resources with the affirmative focus on regulating fracking from the perspective of the Safe Drinking Water Act. So I hope everybody enjoys and that this is useful. It should be moderately paced so that stuff can be used in future years as well as a teaching tool. So hopefully that you find this useful. Thank you.
Hey, what's up? My name is Irshad. I'm the lab leader at the Wayne State DUDL summer camp. I am doing a practice debate with Doug Husic. I'll be on the neg, going for a colonialism critique of the environment. I'll be going for an econ disadvantage, and I'll also be reading an advantage counterplan. And yeah, I'm a Wayne State debater, and this debate's going to be fun.
Folks should look like on the debate. So when you go to a tournament this year, you're going to get a pairing through this online service called Tab Room that your coaches have either already helped you set up an account in previous seasons for, or will walk you through the steps of setting up an account before the first tournament. But you will be receiving and doing a lot of your sort of pre-round activities through the internet and online debate. So there are really three things that I want to sort of emphasize. When you get a pairing for your debate, you should try and go to the online version of that room, which will be hosted here in Zoom, and do what we call disclosure. This is where the negative team usually comes into the room and asks the affirmative team what plan or affirmative they plan on reading for that debate. The affirmative team might also choose to disclose what advantages they're reading with that affirmative, but usually it's nice etiquette to at the very least tell your opponent what the plain text and general idea of the affirmative is going into the debate. Negative teams can also choose to disclose things like their previous 2&R strategies or what arguments they've gone for if the affirmative team asks for it. Debate is a competitive activity, but we're also all trying to learn and become better speakers. And the best way to do that is if we know a little bit about each other's arguments before we just jump into a debate. So it's good etiquette to get into the practice of for just showing up 30 minutes before a round and being like, hey, what's going on with this before you go to your coaches or go to talk with your partner about what in-round strategy should look like. The second thing you should do when you enter a Zoom room is start what's called an email chain, or maybe set up a speech drop room if you're used to doing that in the past. So the affirmative team should ask the negative team for their email addresses and try to get the process of setting up an email chain for the debate round before the round starts so things can run orderly and on time. It just sort of helps everybody and removes a little bit of the stress that sort of has to go into a debate beforehand. And the third and final thing that's most important is to make sure that you have some sort of writing utensil or something to keep track of the notes of the debate on. Online debate has created a lot of logistical hurdles that we wouldn't normally have. So it might be harder to maybe have 2 different color pens or to have the type of paper that you would have at school, but make use with what you have at home. Use things like Excel spreadsheets if you are lucky enough to be able to use a computer during the debate, and make that work for you. Before we jump into the debate, to just sort of emphasize that, you should try to be taking notes during this. I'm sure that your lab leaders are going to want to go over some of the content that's in this debate because we're going to be using the tools and resources that are in the packet. And we're also going to hopefully, showcase some of the strategy that goes into debate. We're going to have Irshad narrate some of the decisions that he's going to make during the negative block. And you should maybe take some notes during those sections as well on another piece of paper, because they might be useful to you in future debates when you're attempting to use these files. So with that, I've already sent out the 1AC to Irshad. Irshad, you have it and it's up and ready to go. All right, then in about 30 seconds, I will start the 1AC. Give everybody some time to just get organized. Another useful thing, just while I'm thinking about it in this dead time, is make sure that everyone's present in your debate room too. It's not a bad idea to just be like, hey, if there are a bunch of screens, be like, can I get a thumbs up from the judge, or can I get like vocal confirmation that everybody's sort of here? So like right now with Irshad being away from the computer, I'd want to make sure that, he's back before I start giving the speech. There have been numerous instances in this past year and a half where folks have either started a speech with folks not being there. So it's good to get into the habit of just asking those sorts of questions before you jump into a speech.
Let me just get a pen and then I'll be ready to go.
No worries, just let me know when you're good to go.
Ready?
All right, cool. I am about to start. Plan. The United States federal government should substantially increase its protection of water resources in the United States by ending hydraulic fracturing's exemption from the Safe Drinking Water Act, as well as establishing a public disclosure regime aimed at disclosing all chemical compounds used in operations, along with implementing standards requiring best practices in waste disposal. Advantage one is the environment. Number one, hydraulic fracturing is a lead cause of water contamination, disrupting aquatic ecosystems, Shamel and 18. Water displacement could have negative impacts on aquatic biodiversity and ecosystems, focused on disruptive effects of withdrawing water from nearby streams of biodiversity. Fracking requires millions of gallons of fresh water to extract oil and gas from shale. Much is obtained by pumping fresh water from local streams. Aquatic species are declining at a concerning rate. Second, fracking also creates soil pollution and erosion, which destroys ecosystems and causes earthquakes. Meng and 17. Fracking directly changes the anthroposphere, water, soil pollution, huge amount of methane emissions, weathering and soil erosion and deposition, and rock composition, seismicity, and earthquakes. Fracking is also has significant effects in the hydrosphere, including freshwater consumption, wastewater pollution, and terrestrial biomes. Third, both control future food collapse and diseases. Pensada in 20. We depend and will continue to depend on the ecosystem services provided by soils. The main source of soil pollution are the chemicals used in or produced by products, industrial activities. Petroleum-driven products, soil pollution is an adverse impact on food security in two ways. It can reduce crop yields due to toxic levels of contaminants, and crops grown in polluted soils are unsafe for consumption. Soil pollution can lead to new diseases by changing the balance of the ecosystem. It contributes to the spreading of antimicrobial resistance bacteria, limiting humanity's ability to cope with pathogens. Soil has a key role to play in ecosystem function as it affects water regulation, nutrient recycling, food production, climate change, and the biodiversity of terrestrial ecosystems. Fourth, fracking causes biodiversity collapse. Soil health and earthworms are key. Johnson in 17. Earthworms have been ranked the #1 of the most influential species in history. Ecologists consider earthworms a keystone species. 5 reasons. Earthworms are recyclers, play a crucial role in breaking down organic matter and fertilizing soil. Second, earthworms are soil engineers. Third, earthworms are barometers for soil health and toxicity. They're very sensitive to soil pollutants such as pesticides, residues, or unwanted heavy metals. 4, juicy earthworms are an important food source. And 5, earthworms can help repair damaged soil and may provide solutions to man-made problems. Human interventions are fast-tracking the world's loss of biodiversity. Without earthworms in our soils, life could vanish pretty quickly. We would have less food, more pollution, and more flooding. 5, disease causes extinction. Maintaining system resilience is key. Millet in 17. Disease events have been responsible for the greatest death tolls. The 1918 flu was responsible for more than 50 million deaths. The Black Death was responsible for killing over 25% of Europe. Do not rule the possibility out. There are recorded instances of species going extinct due to disease. There are examples of large human populations being almost entirely wiped out by disease. Multiple diseases were simultaneously introduced. Each first case attribute can be realized. Some diseases exhibit nearly a 100% case fatality ratio in the absence of treatment. The second advantage is the economy. #1, economic recovery is slow now, but renewable energy focus is key. Gassinger in 21. The pandemic has taken a toll on the nation's economy, with millions losing their job. A recent U.S. Census Bureau survey found that 47% of adults said that they are or another adult in their house have lost employment income since the national emergency was declared because of COVID-19. GDP fell more than $668 billion, or 3.5%. The U.S. economy is still struggling. Infrastructure construction has been effective and impactful means of driving economic recovery. Independent of federal energy mandates and goals, the country is undergoing a transformational clean energy transition away from fossil fuel generation, transmission. Investment of this magnitude would boost GDP by $42 billion and create 442,000 jobs. All of the benefits can be obtained without the need for a massive expenditure of taxpayer dollars. And second, transitioning away from fracking is key for the U.S. energy sector to commit to new renewable resources. Texas proved. Schumann in 20. ExxonMobil said it would eliminate about 14,000 jobs, including 1,900 in the U.S. The follows big layoffs at Shell, BP, Chevron, Schumacher, and more. The industry has been suffering from high supplies and low prices. The pandemic made everything worse, but in Texas and elsewhere, investors have been making big bets on solar and wind power, storage batteries, energy efficiency, and some like. Over 230,000 Texas workers working in advanced energy this summer. That was more workers than in real estate, trucking, and grocery stores in the state. Solar, wind, and storage also account for the vast majority of proposed projects in the pipeline of ERCOT. The grid serving most of Texas investors are putting their money behind wind, solar, and storage, and many more customers, especially corporate buyers, are demanding these technologies. The transition is well underway. Most Fortune 500 companies have adopted sustainability goals. Texas has long been the nation's largest producer of oil and gas, and the fracking revolution has driven production to new heights. But when lawmakers deregulated the electricity market in 1999, they also wanted to encourage renewable energy. Texas became the leader in wind power, and now solar and batteries are on the rise. Third, economic competitiveness is key to U.S.-led global stability and non-proliferation. Bestner et al. In 17. America's status is dependent on its prosperity capacity to allocate resources to forces. The private sector's ability to develop technology to satisfaction of the public are closely tied to growth. The formulation of a long-term strategy must take into account economic interests. America's unparalleled ability to influence countries through nonviolent means has been critical to the preservation of global stability. Our economy plays a key role in helping deal with state threat and stability. The ability to impose sanctions has been a formidable tool discouraging nuclear proliferation. A powerful technology base enables advanced military economic strength should not be taken for granted. Rapid growth in the developing world means that American companies must now contend with an increasingly crowded marketplace. Ensuring that the U.S. retains a role as an innovation capital makes us take the highest priority. Fourth, U.S. superiority is key to deter great power wars, contain proliferation, and combat terrorism. Brands and Edelman in 17. As Washington's margin of superiority is diminished and will undermine alliances, weaken deterrence, tempting adversaries, military dominance constituted by hard power background, global strategy in which rogue states with proliferation and catastrophic terrorism would be suppressed, military power underwrites commitments. If Washington cut back too far, stability would be eroded, rivals emboldened, and international crises unaddressed. The strategic landscape is darkening. Great power, our military competition is back. China and Russia are seeking regional hegemony, developing the military punch to underwrite these ambitions. Russia has conducted a major modernization emphasizing nuclear weapons. China is carried out build up threat. Neighbors Pyongyang has amassed a growing nuclear arsenal. Iran remains a nuclear threshold state. The balance of power between the U.S. and China has been approaching a series of tipping points. The situation in Eastern Europe is worse. 5. Nuclear terrorism leads to extinction. Terrorists have the capabilities and will retaliate. Dobbins in 15. The global impact of a nuclear terrorist attack would emerge as a bleak picture of potential political and policy consequences of both the terror attack and the American response. The proliferation of nuclear knowledge and technology now makes the nuclear terror threat possible. We are now more vulnerable to nuclear terrorism than any time in the dawn of the nuclear age. The failure of intelligence increases the threat of nuclear terrorism. Nations can provide materials support, or they have insufficient control over nuclear materials. They may still be treaties and agreements, but after a nuclear weapons detonates, they may simply be a piece of paper. The risk is simply too great to trust another government that would even be capable of keeping its nuclear issues within its borders. And 6, proliferation causes extinction. Cronin in 15. The spread of nuclear weapons poses a severe threat to international security, nuclear war, nuclear terrorism, global and regional instability, constrained by U.S. freedom of action, weaken alliances, and furthers nuclear proliferation. The more nuclear weapons, the greater the probability there will be a catastrophic nuclear war. Nuclear states go through a transition period in which they lack a secure second strike capability. One of both states might believe that they have an incentive to use nuclear weapons first. Preventive nuclear strike emphasizes use them or lose them. Pressures of future could result in devastating nuclear exchange. The spread of nuclear weapons also increases the risk of nuclear terrorism. Nuclear weapons embolden nuclear powers to regional instability. States with nuclear weapons, engage in lower level aggression. The spread of nuclear weapons emboldens regional instability and increases result in catastrophic nuclear exchange. Contention 3 is solvency. Hydraulic fracturing is the only industry exempt from the Safe Drinking Water Act. Ending exemptions and implementing safety measures solves earthworks in 21. The EPA does not regulate injection of the fracturing fluids from the Safe Drinking Water Act. Of the oil and gas industry is the only industry allowed by the EPA to inject some hazardous material directly into driving water supplies. This exemption has been known as the Halliburton loophole. The most aid companies do not have to prove that fractures have stayed within target formations, nor do companies have to monitor water quality. Mark card at monitor water quality. And I am open for cross-examination whenever you're ready.
All right. Just pulling up the timer. Just use my phone. All right. Your Millet 17 card says that some diseases exhibit a 100 case fatality ratio, but only in the absence of treatment. Why would new diseases wipe out everybody?
Because we don't have the treatment measures to be able to keep up with them. Our evidence indicates that things like contamination and industrial sort of pollution is a major cause that puts humanity at both ever greater risk from just like wastewater being dirty, but also by putting us in closer, proximity to these new microbiomes that are harmful.
Sure, but why would, I guess, not previous sorts of treatment at least provide some sort of mechanism to, slow down the death toll? Like, why would new diseases be so, where in your evidence does it indicate that these new diseases would be so different that there is no cross-applicable treatments?
Well, the Millet evidence does do an empirical study of diseases that have been devastating to like humanity in general, but there have been instances in which entire species have been rendered extinct by coming into proximity with one or multiple diseases. You're right, we might be able to keep up with the treatment of just one disease like COVID-19, but if you were to add on another disease while we're dealing with a current pandemic, it would obviously exacerbate our capacity to deal with it. It's better to just not come in confrontation with those germs than to try to keep up with 1,000 different ones.
Sure. Your Johnson 17 evidence above says that earthworms are a keystone species. Where does it say fracking would kill nearly all or most earthworms to have a significant impact?
Yeah, so the evidence above that indicates that biodiversity or ecosystems become almost uninhabitable because the wastewater, for instance, can't be treated at a water treatment facility. So things like earthworms die in the soil, they live in the soil. Our evidence indicates that soil would be uninhabitable for both things like plant life, but also organic life like earthworms.
Yeah, sure. But I guess even if fracking continues in the areas where it currently goes, why would the death of those earthworms, I guess, have global impacts if earthworms are present basically everywhere?
So earthworms would be affected in the United States. They're keystone species that are important to sort of our ecosystem. We also put waste removal standards in place, which are, I think, important to resolving the residual effects that part of your question was asking about. But in terms of international sort of follow on, the United States would be a beacon of leadership, stuff like that. China and Russia would likely follow suit to stay on board with green energy sort of control, as well as us putting in these standards.
Sure. Last thing, what is hydraulic fracturing?
Hydraulic fracturing is the use of water and other sort of lubricants to push out oil from deep wells in the ground. In the plates, I think, actually. All right, you don't need prep, right, Irshad?
No. Yeah, let me send it out though. Sorry. Okay. Yeah, it was sent. It's going to be 3 off, and then case in the order of environment advantage, econ advantage, solvency. Yeah. Is everybody good?
So for everybody that is flowing and has the tools in front of them, you should have 6 pieces of paper in front of you right now. Hopefully you got 3 pieces of paper from the 1AC because there are 2 advantages and a solvency contention. There will be 3 new arguments introduced in this speech. So those should add up to 6 pieces of paper.
Yep. All right. Start in 10. All right. Calls to protect water resources are part of a broader discourse of environmental securitization that's used to force a broader national agenda. Fish Handler 15. Scholarly work on natural resource governance technologies, the decisive role language plays. Discourse shape what can and cannot be thought, delimit the range of policy options and available and versus policy outcomes. Environmental security. Discourse presupposes environmental threats that serve as urgent and interrelated to human safety. Scholarship call for national security agendas to encompass environmental concerns such as food, water, and energy. Arguing a failure to do so may lead to the eruption of conflicts. The focus on securitizing actors and audiences in the water sector underrates the broader societal structure. The result of these interdependencies may create an affinity between water availability, complex food security, and economic growth. Tactical securitization happens when low politics issues such as water are linked with the high politics of the national survival, such as peace and war. Once an issue is securitized, exceptional measures to prevent an existential threat are often legitimized as well, including the waging of war. Securitization is about the breaking normal politics, placing issues beyond public debate, and making decisions on the basis of urgency, anxiety, and a willingness to sacrifice. Techno-managerialism depoliticizes resistance and facilitates the logic of colonialism. Adjacent Octar 20. There exists an ability and knowledge value structures underpinning water development. This hydro social assembly brings together material and affective energies, focus on quantifying water as an effective racing the political that produce water as a resource, as a politicizing. The natural resource governance for colonial managers was passive and calculable and informed by the colonial logic of power. Imperial management of water and people went hand in hand. The science of the empire helped realize water's efficiency and empire. Local knowledges were forcefully silenced to make room for positive engineering, technological, and data-centric solutions are enrolled by states in attempts to bypass political conflict and ideological struggle, resituating them on supposedly objective and technical grounds. The epistemic assumptions of water management were consolidated under colonial rule. This techno-managerial approach to water resources was premised on the suppression of political struggle and the protection of water resources and ammunition for imperialist vendors. Cohen 21. Harris said there will be wars over water. The U.S. government justified imperialist endeavors in the name of protecting water resources, supported right-wing coup in Bolivia, demonizing Morales due to his privatization of Cochamba's water supply. Central Asia and Africa are 2 main regions where U.S. consent sites tensions have been growing over water resources. Imperialists could sponsor color revolutions and install leadership role to transnational capital. Africa is plentiful of fresh water, coincide with the distribution of Africa. Ensure resources will continue exploited by transnational cooperation. NATO's intervention threatened Great River to be able to supply fresh water to Libya. For now, Libya is in crisis over water due to tensions flared over to Ethiopia. and Dame Washington wants to have Pan-African unity. And the Altists embrace watery relations that understand water as a socio-natural force that is an active agent. Chen 13. Practice influence and limit how you map and understand water's limit or enable relationship play technologies to employ to support violent colonial relations where cartographic and practices that impose instrumental understandings of water. Similar mappings continue to be used to constitute watery resources. Communications is limited by language. We need to move away from water as a resource. Watery relations relations may include the communities of disease and environmental toxicity, as well as many everyday water practices. Unlike the abstract idea of water resources, the water that join us are articulated with space and time. The conceptual place of waters has been in resource place discourse. The water is conceptually ordered. The idea of resources inevitably raises the idea of its opposite, that which is judged unuseful, excessive, or unintelligible. Water is a socio-natural force and active agent of world creation and destruction. Water materially communicates. So nature is always transformation of limits beyond the passivity of the resource. When applied to water, it's forced to think beyond normative bounds. Next, the CP. Counterplay text. The USFG should substantially increase its construction of constructed wetlands, including use of multi-objective management, integrated watershed management, and accurate simulation of natural wetlands, and its construction of constructed wetlands. 2. The United States federal government should establish a national emergency immunization program. A national emergency immunization program solves the next pandemic. Centralization is key. Kenyon 21. It is critical the U.S. establishes a program to deliver effective new vaccines to avert cataclysmic mortality, economic destruction, and insecurity. There must be a rapid delivery system to immunize at least 80% of the population to reach herd immunity. National emergency immunization program look like White House leadership, Congress allocated funds, and the NIH for in charge of vaccine research, FDA responsible for oversight, CDC for national guidelines of funding, the states for vaccine delivery, federal funding, and clearly communicated guidance and support standardization across departments would provide logistical consistency. And that solves balances water treatment with biodiversity conservation. Thing at L20. Integrating the multiple ecological functions necessary to balance the stakeholder values. The ecosystem management at the watershed scale with effective for conservation may help attract organisms, high quality natural habitats, and such CWs, thus addressing ecological traps. CWs with more wetland characteristics encourage conservation, maximize the potential for enhancing macro invertebrate diversity utilization of indigenous plant species. Next, the econ disad. 1. Econ recovery succeeding now thanks to certainty in Biden agenda building business confidence. The Cheney come bond 627. Business investments emerging with powerful sources of economic growth that will sustain the recovery. Companies are ramping upwards as they grow more confident. The orders for non-defense capital goods measure for business investment at the highest level back in the 90s. Business investment, an important engine powering the U.S. economic recovery. Beyond consumer spending is driving the recovery. Robust capital investment will be key to ensuring that the recovery maintains strength after the stimulus and business reopening. They eventually fade. Rising business investments help fuel economic output, lift worker productivity, executive increasingly confident in the economy's trajectory. We're seeing really strong reopening to make capital investment. Follows that lesson certainly regarding trade tensions between the U.S. and China should further underpin business confidence and investment. Business will understand the strategy Biden's trying to follow on the evil around the order backlog of building led to higher manufacturing activity, manufacturing capital intensive industry. And 2, environmental regulations gut business confidence, gross the economy, cost litigation, and undermine small business. Oregon 18. Research showed the impact of government regulation the greatest on small firms. The environmental regulation deal with pollution. Studies suggest environmental regulation overly complex, especially problematic for small businesses because the rules can incur fixed costs, chief economics, tendencies, and burdensome regulation been a key factor driving U.S. business confidence, production, and capital spending. It is of utmost importance to business production process and decisions about hiring, expansion plans, and investment strategy. Improve climate for business investment spending will help lift the growth rate of the economy. Environmental policy is extremely complex. It led to ungainly bureaucracy that incurred high costs, politically polarized, very litigants. The U.S. companies complain about high costs of compliance. The rules result in job laws that make American companies less competitive internationally. And fracking regulations, fracking regulations are uniquely harmful, cause rippling uncertainty and bankruptcy. Brand 16. Construction company will shed workers uncertainty, probably going to send us broken moratorium, ruining business confidence across the entire oil and gas. Lack of certainty onshore gas industry critical to economic future. And 4. Economic collapse cause nuclear war. Extinction. Bear 20. Economic prosperity is a bedrock of political strength. Equitable recovery will have powerful U.S. interests undermining legitimacy and its international standing. American needs growth strategy through infrastructure. Strength increases influence and strong military. Not enough. The first on prosperity must be shared mobility, creates credibility with values, model setting the state for leadership. Mark the card at leadership. Now on to case environment advantage. 1. No environment impact. While fracking does have risks, it's overwhelmingly safe and does not affect groundwater negatively. Welsh 15. The most recent review of the hydraulic fracturing found in not cause wide spread on the U.S. drinking water. The EPA acknowledged specific instances around the country where fracking polluted or depleted groundwater, but the agency maintained that those situations involved tiny fractions more than 25,000 oil and gas wells being drilled every year nationwide. Hydraulic fracturing process being carried out in the way that not led to widespread systemic impacts on drinking water. 2. All causes to soil and water pollution outside fracking, farming, and pesticides. Fair 19. Pesticides and fertilizers used on crops fed to animals major contribute to land pollution. A portion of fertilizers Washington all other ways with eroded sediments, led to creation of dead zones that kill aquatic life. Use of artificial fertilizers in place of many organisms eventually deplete soils and proper disposable waste
waste, livestock, agriculture, deforestation, logging out, net contribute to EHD emission. 3, humans can survive post-collapse and no relationship between survival and biodiversity. There, you also use flawed data analysis. Code 14, there are limitations of regression analysis of proof of causality between loss of biodiversity, ecosystem lose a proportion of the biodiversity without adverse consequences. Loss of biodiversity could be the result of other parts of the world. Lack of correlation shows indicators hinder interpretation of results. Broad separate and her no correlation between well-being and available data for ecosystem services. No direct causal link between biodiversity decline and health-based prevention can be explained in diversity poor environment. And 4, natural pandemics will cause human extinction. Part 17, natural pandemics very unlikely to cause human extinction of species extinction. Less than 4% where the infection disease downward globally dispersed other factors contributing to species numerous incapable rational response. Very unlikely to be killed off by a natural pandemic. Highly lethal pathogens can cope their hooks before they spread, so there's selective pressure for pathogens not to be highly lethal. Okay. Yeah, I mean, that's 8 minutes. Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, open for cross.
Cool. Starting now. What is the status of the counterplan and critique?
Conditional.
All right, I want to talk a little bit about the critique. First, what are watery relations?
Watery relations emphasize the agential capacity of water and the way that like indigenous communities not only should get access and sovereignty over their water, but also things like land and the resources rather than.
How does that recognize the agential capacity of water if you're just like indigenous people have a better understanding of water?
Well, not only is it a better understanding of water, but it's one that like doesn't approach it through a top-down nationalist imposition of like sovereign management of water. It's rather like a way of like being with the water and, you know, like coexisting with the water as opposed to like, you know.
What does coexisting with the water do to prevent contamination that can't be cleaned?
Well, our argument would impact from the idea that indigenous people can't, you know, clean their water.
But like, what I guess, what evidence have you read that indicates you can clean water from the waste that fracking puts in it?
Well, the alt card Gen 13 talks about how water relations include communities of disease and environmental toxicity, as well as everyday water practices, which I mean, lets us recognize not only the water quality and tend to it, but also like just better enabled judgment of what constitutes like water that needs to be cleaned.
All right, what do these communities do when a corporation just like moves outside the community and dumps somewhere else?
Well, our argument is that they would still dump in someone's area, and those areas should have access or sovereignty over their own land and water, which would solve that issue.
Okay, the Cohen evidence, it discusses things like NATO, us intervening into Libya over water resources. What's the connection between that example and the affirmative, which is about US policy, like internal?
Well, the problem is that not only does US have ramifications for the international sphere, but it's also about the internal. It's about the international ramifications that domestic policy does by affecting the international sphere. Specifically, it talks about transnational capital and how places like Central Asia or in Africa, for example, are places where the US government has exported some of its own colonial understandings of water onto the populace there.
All right, my last question is about the counterplan. How do you get other populations in other countries vaccinated if folks won't take a vaccine now?
Well, our argument, sorry, in relation to the counterplan?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, our argument is that an emergency immunization program distributes vaccines better, which means even if there's like anti-vaxxers out, obviously quick emergency immunization not only distributes vaccines better, but also creates a centralized system to make the vaccine faster, which means like the pandemic time would have been shortened. People would have gotten vaccines not only faster, but also wouldn't have given time for that to be delivered.
Cool. Thanks. All right. I do not need prep time, so let me reply and just send this out. All right, should be sent. Let me know when you have it up, Irshad. Good for an order.
Yeah.
All right. So my roadmap for everybody is going to be the environment advantage, then the economy advantage, the advantage counterplan, or just the counterplan if you have it down as that, the criticism, the K, and then the econ DA is last. One more time for everybody. The first thing in my order is the environment advantage. Second thing is the economy advantage. Third thing is the counterplan. The fourth thing in the order is the environment criticism. And the last thing in the order is the econ disadvantage. All right, are you good for me to start, Irshad? Cool, then I will start in a couple of seconds. Environmental catastrophe outweighs and turns every disadvantage. Legal loopholes and lack of regulatory standards ensures indiscriminate fracking, guaranteeing environmental disasters. Two unique impacts. One, biodiversity loss. Indiscriminate fracking hampers carrying capacity for local environments from waste, causing mass die-offs and destroying soil. Prefer it. Every species is like a piece of Jenga. Earthworms being pulled out is just one can cause the whole tower to collapse, resulting in extinction. Second, disease. Pollution dramatically increases the risk of being exposed to new diseases. COVID-19 was a dress rehearsal and means you should elevate the risk of a pandemic. Future pandemics will have higher lethality and will have ripple effects throughout the economy. The line by line, the only argument I need to respond to here are the alternative causes. These can all be treated through water treatment facilities, but our evidence indicates that hydraulic fracturing is unique because water treatment facilities cannot clean it now. On to the economy advantage. Green energy is necessary for sustainable growth in a thriving economy. Decline gives rise to competitors and challengers who will take advantage of hampered American influence. Betting on fracking now is a bet that will destroy all influence in the future. Two impacts. First is terrorism. Increases the likelihood of prestige attacks. Nuclear tech and know-how is becoming more widely dispersed, making the next terrorist attack a Hiroshima or Nagasaki style event. Second, absent economic influence, the US cannot motivate counter-proliferation ventures or treaties in the Middle East and Northeast Asia. New waves of proliferators have weak command and control and no secure second strike capabilities, becoming embroiled, increasing the likelihood of an apocalyptic nuclear accident. Onto the off-case positions. First, the counterplan. One, permutation do both. It shields the link, economic boon from constructed watersheds and vaccines overcomes the negative expectations of the plan's regulation. Second, the counterplan links to the net benefit. The vaccine plank is perceived by businesses as regulatory overreach by the government in the developmental processes. Third, constructed wetlands failed. They're costly and inefficient. Zhang et al. In 20. CWs have disadvantages that reduce the operability and affordability. They require a larger area of land. The purification function inevitably leads to the clogging of filtration media and substrate poses. B, it doesn't solve warming. The benefits vary depending on climate and they could emit more than they sequester. Rosley et al. In 16. Wetlands become major carbon source. Constructed wetlands could either be a sink or source of CO2 depending on the time scale of research and the environmental management. Constructed wetlands emit 2 to 10 times more than GHGs than natural wetlands. 4, turned. Constructed wetlands cause disease and increase warming. Killness in 19. Wetlands in the form of swamps are breeding grounds of mosquitoes and other diseases. Constructed wetlands are land intensive under undertakings, training and filling in natural wetlands to permit urban development. Methane has 10 times the atmospheric warming capacity of carbon dioxide. It's the most effective greenhouse gas for global warming. Wetlands produce about 1/4 of the Earth's atmospheric methane through the anaerobic decomposition of organic matter and unable to treat highly toxic modern wastewater. 5, the counterplane doesn't solve vaccines globally. US vaccines aren't exported and wouldn't meet global demand. Armstrong in 21. While it might seem to box up the spares and send them out, the reality is far more complex. Unused U.S. doses are scattered across tens of thousands of locations. There's little indication the U.S. strategy of ensuring more than ample supply at home will change anytime soon. Even if unused U.S. inoculations were sent abroad, they would more than likely barely a dent in the need. The globe needs billions of vaccines. 6, conditionality is a voter. It skews 2HG strategy by mooting our best offense and justifies contradictions and argumentative irresponsibility. B, dispositionality solves their offense. C, they don't judge, pick in the 2 and R. It undermines comparative impact calc. Now on to the criticism. First, framework, interpretation, the plan equals the focus of the debate. A, reject alternative frameworks or prior questions or ethical starting points. It shifts the balance of prep and invades 8 minutes offense. B, education, it undercuts rigorous topic examination in favor of painting the world with broad brushes. C, environmental and productive reforms like the plan are necessary to deal with climate change and solve water availability. Hornet Island 17. To implement effective and sustainable reforms, provide environmental mainstreaming is required as a result of initial advocacy role. Environmental organization play in establishing importance. Environmental water management is often siloed within water resource organizations. This limits novel integrated solutions. Effective policy made the governance structured for managing water resources would support concepts of conjunctive water uses rather than the usual competitive paradigm. Integrating environmental water within broader water resource management would also be more nimble and informed response to change. After active discussions will be required to see how these changes in supply are distributed among water users and what changes are required to deliver water for both societal and environmental purposes. And institutional arrangements should reflect conscious societally to inform decisions around how water resources will be managed effectively over time. B, political solutions in the context of the environment are necessary response to climate change. Better be in 19. If a detailed political ecology analysis revealing widespread social or environmental injustice receives wide dissemination or support to corporations, nefarious organizations out of business, or politicians on elected political ecology is valuable to the current worldwide attention of environmental concerns has refocused energy on the biggest. There has been widespread acceptance and call for environmental crisis. We need to participating in policy process, keeping on or teaching, sharpening our media skills and reaching out rather than inward. And affirmative political ecology requires agile activism, ethical scholarship, and partnership, not just telling and thinking it, also speaking and breathing it. E, performative contradictions prove any other interprets arbitrary and self-serving, elevates the permutation and no-link arguments since the negative is allowed to sever their representations. Permutation, next argument is permutation do both. The best way forward is to always try to bring it all together to produce the most effective practical solutions. Read E. And 16, many different analyses of sustainability are evident, underpinned by conflicting under goals. As staying as we are is not an option. We draw attention to emerging movements. We are a transition formation, real people. They use our warnings of climate change, stories about technological solution, and analytically political gossip. Finding space transformation is challenging. One step is always an attempt to bring the different strands together. This might mean offering practical solution or drawing attention to how disconnected the political is a form of climate science. Faced with the uncertainty, we need to resist the temptation to see a transformation as realistic short-term solution. Third is offense. Their approach makes it so that it is ethical to dump in other places. It creates no legal or functional structural barrier to corporations polluting in other areas, even if the alternative is able to solve it. Simply the offshoring of this pollution to another community and makes it so that it's incapable of solving. 5, they can't solve its alternative. The cross-sex was horrible on this sort of question. At best, they get to dismantling corporations through things like arson, but that isn't capable of actually getting rid of contamination. It also means that they put the waste in the water and can't be able to clean it. Our evidence is specific to it. This isn't wishful ambitions. This is wastewater that literally takes thousands of years to be able to remove contaminants from. The econ dissent. 1, confidence is low now. Businesses already fear regulation. Morales and Nolan at 614. Optimism continues to feign concerns over material labor costs. Supply chains are increasing. Taxes, regulations, they expect to stall recovery and growth, feeding indicator confidence decline for the second month in a row. Imports slowed. Lack of confidence in our governance. Second link term, clear regulations are key to business confidence. Sparkle 18. Global economy depends on water. The water insecurity that can treat the real business confidence. Businesses always evaluate the resiliency of water and other infrastructure systems. In the absence of reliable water deliveries, many of the businesses likely compounding losses. process. Third, turn externally fracking ensures economic shocks, which wreck competitiveness. Baker. And 15, hidden financial risk is this with fracking, given the environmental hazards and liabilities. The presence of fracking reflected a latent risk of financial market. Several insiders refer to the fracking boon as a Ponzi scheme, and fracking presents all of the features of hybrid private activity in the regulatory vacuum. The regulation touches upon public goods and snare with interconnected, localized, and systemic risks. 4, no business confidence, internal link, it's a myth. Buchanan. 19, there's little historical evidence regulation to the levels of growth. Executives convince complying diverts money. It's not that any evidence. Business types just feel it. There is no evidence that deregulation causes growth. Mark hard at deregulation causes growth.
All right.
Before cross-ex, we have somebody that's raising their hand. I think it's Vicky.
Yeah, sure.
Yep.
Shoot.
Yeah. Feel free to answer or ask the question, Victoria.
Hi, I'm sorry, my internet was messing up. So what are we doing?
Yeah, right now we're just demonstrating what an online debate would sort of look like. It's okay that your internet came out, that's totally fine. Just try to jump into the debate wherever you can and try to take notes. We're just about to jump into the cross-examination of the 2AC.
Okay, so like what we taking notes on?
You should be attempting to just write down some of the arguments that we talk about, some moments in the debate that are maybe interesting to you or seemed like were important. Anything that seems super duper relevant. Really, you should be just trying to catch the arguments that we're putting forth in this demonstration.
All right, thank you.
No problem.
Yeah, anybody else, or are we good for cross? All right, oh my God. Starting on that last card you read, so why is business confidence have no internal link again?
Sure. So business confidence, we didn't get to the meat of this, but it's really just a feeling that CEOs have. That's all business confidence is, a buzzword. So it's if corporations feel happy, then the economy is good. But there's no actual empirical proof for this. Deregulation during the Trump era didn't cause a massive spike in economic growth. It didn't make CEOs more likely to spend their dollars on better or nicer things. It's just a buzzword to make CEOs happy.
Gotcha. Fracking causes economic shocks. How?
So there are a couple ways that this evidence indicates. First is there's systemic environmental risks. So if something really bad happens, you might be on the hook for destroying the environment and now having tons of resources that you can't get out of there. Second,
when has this happened?
When has this happened? I mean,
yeah.
It's a projection based off of the way markets go. It's at some
Okay.
point an environmental catastrophe will occur and that asset will be stranded.
Okay. Yeah. Then on the uniqueness, businesses already fear regulation. How does that relate to low confidence? I guess whether or not regulation exists.
Business confidence is sort of an internal link that's based off of the perception of CEOs, the people that would be regulated. So if Biden is already anticipating putting regulations on these companies, their optimism should either be lower or they don't care about regulations. They're just puffing out their chests.
Okay. On the critique, how are your Hornadal 17 card? Why are reforms key to climate change, I guess?
So I guess a big portion of it is you have no mechanism to ensure that corporations don't just go and dump somewhere else. That's why the plan and sort of the political process that the plan does is an important one, because it changes the way that fracking companies dispose of waste.
Right. Okay. Conditionality. How does dispo solve any offense?
Sure, it means that we would be able to straight turn a counterplan or a criticism. We could have just read impact turns or add-ons against one of them, meaning that we could have focused the debate in on the plan versus, the counterplan, or the plan versus the criticism. But you force us into making contradictions because you made them. So it's not really fair for us to be behind in the debate because of that.
Sure. And lastly, how does our and yeah, that's basically time. Okay. All right.
You have your hand up, Victoria. What's up?
I have one more question. So you say something about y'all keep saying something about the cards. So what are we putting on the cards?
So right now, Irshad and I are like sharing the evidence that we're using in this debate through an email chain. You don't need to have the cards right in front of you or be worried about the specifics of them. They're just like the pieces of evidence that we're referencing in this debate. If you do want to follow along, the evidence that we're using is the stuff that's just on the Urban Debate League website, all of the packet files. So the 1AC, for instance, is up there in the fracking affirmative file. In all of the stuff that Irshad read in the 1NC and I read in the 2AC is also up there if you just want to like look through that to try and get a better grasp of where we are in the debate.
Okay, thank you.
No problem.
Yeah. Yeah, any other questions before I start prep? Okay, so for prep, I'm going to actually just narrate like my internal, like what's going on in my head and also share my screen. So I will literally just like give you what is happening. So this is okay. So first, this is the 2NC file that I've created. Well, the 2NC and 1NR since I'm mapping against Doug. What my current plan is to kick the counter plan. So first for the counter plan, I'm going to concede the perm, which makes which means I do not have to deal with some of the offense or turns that he's placed on this flow since I'm not going for the counter plan. Offense on an advocacy in a world where I get conditionality means I don't have to deal with the offense, but I do have to deal with this condo argument, which is why I have this set up, which is an interpretation that gets me one conditional CP, one conditional K. Answers to dispo are already there. I get the neg flex and I have no impact to his. So I think my current block is enough because his was only 3 points and it answers all of them. So next, I'm going to talk about the disad, even though it's in the 1NR. The reason disads I think usually go in the 1NR is because people like their 1Ns to card spam, which usually happens on the disad. And usually like 5 minutes is just roughly a good time to take the disad. I have it timed for 3.5 minutes. I'm going to be spreading a bit slower, so that's why. So specifically, let's talk about the disad and what arguments were made there. There were 4 arguments made. I'm starting with an overview that will talk about how the disad turns and outweighs with a card relating it to the environment. In analysis, which is basically the overview itself for the disad, since it is an economy disad, talking about how it turns the second advantage, which is just explaining the impact of the disad. And then third, the solvency. I have a nice little card here about how it turns and guts the solvency. This will probably take about 45 seconds to a minute to read. Now, Doug's first argument is that uniqueness confidence is low right now because businesses fear regulations. So if all I need to really do is, this is an extension for the uniqueness. However, I think I don't need to really have this. I might still read it, but there's a good chance I skip it if I have time, because the only aspect of the uniqueness that's been disputed is business and consumer confidence, not high now. So I'm going to read these 2 cards that dispute that. That takes care of the first thing, right? Uniqueness. Now, his second argument he's made is a link turn argument. This link turn argument is that clear environmental regulations help restore business confidence, right? Basically, this is like regulations are good for, helping out. I think these cards are pretty responsive because they indict and take into account of how regulations might have good aspects of them, but it still leads to overall net less confidence. I think this is all I need to answer this link turn. So what I'm going to do is see on the left-hand side, this is what's called a block in verbatim. If I drag it upwards, I can move it around in the document, make it do cool stuff. And so I'm going to put this right after my first argument, labeling it the second argument. Now, third, turn fracking causes shocks. I need to figure out what I'm going to do for this one. But I think I can, let's see. Let me think about just what. Yeah, I think these are fairly responsive. I think these will work to answering it. It's not super great. Oh, no. You know what? I'm wrong. I'm going to use these cards. I think these are actually better. Because yeah. It's talking about how the plan does destroy confidence and does hurt the economy a bit. Obviously that disputes his turn claim that fracking would cause economic shocks. So I think this is a solid part to put my third set of cards. Lastly, his fourth argument was that there's no BizCon internal link. I think that this explanation of what business confidence is and why it's the internal link to whether the economy doing well or not is all I need. So these are extra cards that I have for other arguments. If I have this, I'll read it if I have time, but I really don't think I'll need this. This is 3 cards, so I don't need this. So I'm putting it under this file that's like stuff I wrote before the round that was unnecessary. I put solvency here because I timed out in the 1NC before I could get solvency. Yeah, I'm putting this part here from the disad. So yeah, that's the solvency, that's the DA. Now I'm just going to go up to the environment advantage. These are just, it's pretty simple. These are just extensions I wrote out for the cards I want to extend. Yeah, and then now let's talk about the critique here. Critique, the way I usually run case is with an overview that has the link, impact, and turns case analysis. The primary link I'm going for here is this sort of like top-down state management link that we've talked about in CrossX. I think this might take a little bit to read, but I think that's okay because I want to emphasize the point across for y'all so you understand the critique, because this is probably a lot of y'all's first time with critiques. Then his first argument is framework. Now, framework, he had this is the top level stuff that I need. Now, in terms of answering the line by line on the framework, his first argument was that it shifts prep. I think this fairness argument takes it out, but I don't think I need to do the whole thing because his was just one line and there was no explicit fairness. It wasn't articulated as fairness, but prep. So I'm going to change the word fairness to prep to make it a little bit more responsive. Yeah, and then I think I don't need this clash argument because while there is education and reforms necessary arguments, I imagine that Doug is probably going to go for these carded evidences and not the short blip of prep. And if he does go for that prep argument, it'll blow up in the 1AR. So I am okay with removing this argument because it wasn't really relating to ground too much. Now, I think this education argument, this second argument I've made about how AF should be responsible for how their knowledge is used, that kind of answers their education and topic stuff. Then I have these 2 disads. I might remove one of them based on how I'm doing on time. I'll obviously see there. I only need 1 disad in the 2NR to have an impact that outweighs and wins if I want to go for the critique. And yeah, then the next argument is actually the perm. So my block is doing nice so far. This is the answers that I need to the perm. So I'm good with this. Now, his third argument is corporations will dump elsewhere. I think this state, I'm simply going to make it analytic on my flow to respond to this. What I'm planning on just saying is simply that the alt has some sort of way that it can manage or check corporations. The main internal link for the alt that I'm going to try to cross apply to use this is like an indigenous sovereignty means that corporations can't dump on lands owned by like indigenous people. So basically, I'm just going to write on my flow, indig, sovereign, solves, impact. And that's all I have on my flow. I'm just going to spitball when I get there. But yeah, and then the last argument is the alt can't solve climate change. This is a block I've wrote about how the alt can solve climate change. This is a kind of link that I have about micropolitics scaling upwards. I will read this if I have time as an extra link, but right now I think that that is all I need. That's pretty much everything I have for the block. So I'm going to end prep. I wasn't actually timing, sorry. I took extra time to explain this to y'all. But yeah, this is the block, how I'm doing it. Does anybody have any questions before I start in a
I
little
see,
bit?
Evelyn, you have your hand raised, so you can go first.
Yeah, okay. So my question was just about, so seeing like with your one in our prep, it kind of looks like, you're very organized. You have a lot of stuff in like
Thank you.
thing. So I was just wondering, how much of this did you do like on the spot and how much did you do like in your own time? Because I just want to make sure that I'm prepared
Yeah.
for.
Yeah, so I'm definitely a block heavy debater a little bit. I'm just, especially during online, I just find myself, especially because of college debate now, I just find myself needing to prep a lot more before the round. And the main thing that I'll say to you about that is I think the arguments that most AFs make, for me at the very least, are pretty predictable. I figured that Doug would probably make a link turn argument. In terms of before the round, I know this seems pretty well organized, but I actually just took all these blocks from the Urban Debate League, answers like ATs and the 2NC. And so the way that I compartmentalize prep when you're talking about the disad specifically is uniqueness answers, link answers, internal link answers, and impact answers. I know Doug's not going to answer the impact because his AF impact is also econ. So I imagine he's not reading econ impact defense, right? The internal link, I thought he would say something about business confidence. I was right. So, and simply just understanding that the internal links will be disputed means you need an extension for the internal links and you need cards for the internal link. Link
Okay.
stuff, you need cards, you need an explanation, and uniqueness, same thing. So basically, all I'm saying is divide the disad up like that, have extensions that I think are like analytic and kind of explain your position so the judge knows like what you think about the disad, and then extra cards because obviously disad's, more evidence that high quality is nice. Does that answer your question kind of?
Yeah, so, oh, sorry.
Evelyn, go ahead. Evelyn, go ahead. I didn't mean-
Okay, so does that mean like, do you suggest that I should make my own like verbatim like thing and kind of like organize everything first beforehand?
Yes, 100%. Organizing before the round, especially when, I don't know if a lot of y'all feel this, but sometimes in the debate round, you feel a little bit anxious. You feel like you have a lot of arguments to answer. Just having too many blocks, in my opinion, is always better than having not enough because you can just remove the ones like I did here. So yeah, I definitely recommend that, what you just said.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
To add on to that, for just thinking about prep generally, I usually like to tell debaters that there are 3 types of prep that you do. There's the prep that you do before a debate tournament, like 2 weeks out from it. There's the prep you're doing the days before the tournament. And then there's the prep you're doing literally before the round or in the tournament.
Mhm.
And the easiest way is to compartmentalize which tasks are, easier to do. So it might be easier for you to do a lot of the writing that Irshad's done in this in like the week before or 2 weeks before a tournament, right? You're not going to be able to write out or think about all of these arguments during a debate. Maybe eventually you'll get to that point where you can type up a lot more stuff in a debate, but it takes practice. So if you separate your prep for a tournament into those 3 phases and you're honest about what you can get done in each of those phases, you'll be way more successful because you'll just know some of the things offhand and you'll be able to respond in an actual debate round to like the randomness or sort of the unexpected because you've already done the work 2 weeks ago for the things you expected, right? So that's already sort of like anchored in your brain.
Okay.
Exactly. Yeah. And so the only things that I do during the round are answering things that I did not think were logical AF responses. So yeah. Any other sort of questions, comments, concerns about like how I do prep or how I like organize these speeches? Okay. Well, with that being said, I'm going to get into the neg block. I'm starting with the 2NC, obviously. it will be a critique with an overview. Some people like to put the overview on a new sheet. If you've been flowing and you want to line up arguments, I would recommend that because this is a little bit of a big overview here. But yes, I will be going on the critique, then the environment advantage on case, just the environment advantage, because that was the only place I read cards. Then I'll be going on the counter plan in the 1NR. Sorry, that's the 2NC
Just
critique.
give the 1NR order when we get to the 1NR.
Yeah, sounds good.
So it's the K and then the environment advantage.
Yep, for the 2NC. All right, I'm going to start in 10 seconds. The AF's public disclosure regime does not actually occur to help secure water, but only exists as a way to subvert the government to kick the bucket down the line and ward off criticism, getting used as fuel for the imperial legitimacy of the state in regards to water policy, sanitizing its reputation for the purpose of converting would-be activists into reformists, and mobilized white people towards being liberals focused on short-term environmental resiliency strategies. The impact here is resiliency getting adopted as an overall strategy by the people, which only fragments resistance by endlessly deferring the way we as people have ethical obligations to change how we interact with the environment in favor of leaving up to overarching national sovereign management. This is the link to AF's top-down implementation of water policy, only reinvesting the internal colonial state apparatus and its national agenda, imposing its ability to overdetermine the cultural and social orientation of indigenous people, as well as natural resources like water. Just think about how the AF's reform gets materialized. Policing is increased, especially in Black, Brown, and indigenous communities, in order to ensure the effectiveness of things like implementing standards. And bureaucrats now have an easier time extracting water and other resources from those communities, as those are the bureaucrats are the ones who get left in charge of regional management for resources, things like the public disclosure regime or figuring out what constitutes hydraulic fracturing on a local level. This external impact of anti-indigenous violence also outweighs, even if they win, the plan helps secure a material good of water in some fashion. That accessibility to water only comes about by a colonial management from a nationalist settler government, who is then licensed to continually delineate and control indigenous land, resources, and communities, which only furthers colonial control. Onto the line by line. On framework, counterinterpret, the AF is an object of research. They presented no weight or form to mobilize it into legislation, and this is the only way it can be ethically weighed. The judge is a critical educator who decides the best way of approaching the world, and the role of the ballot is to indicate whether their research is the correct way of understanding the world. This means if we win their theory of state reform through imposing water regulation is flawed, you vote neg. First, their prep arguments are ridiculous. Plan focus restricts the debate to a 10-second statement and leaves the rest of the plan unquestioned. The 1AC is not just a plan text. Their assumptions provide the reason to do the AF. Two, they should be responsible for the way their knowledge is used. This is an education net benefit for us because their interp only subordinates actual correspondence with how the state works structurally as an afterthought, which causes cascading failures because of how structural factors overdetermine individual ones. It means they can't ever accurately predict behavior, which reduces the AF to white noise and means you vote neg on presumption. Third, implementation DA. Their political education is oversimplified and bad. They boil the whole process down to an a priori ballot. That's not real political education. Nothing about organizing or implementation or figuring out how to manage yourself in contrast to water and indigenous communities occurs in round, or even figuring out legislative processes or governmental structures that happen in the 1AC. This is just a celebration for liberals to pat themselves on the back. Only the negative's interpretation creates a particular focus on how the AF moves through political change. 4, silencing dissent. Politics is permeated by neoliberal discourse that revolves around rhetoric that mobilizes populations for or against colonial management of indigenous land and resources that's not theirs, which is what the US is foundationally built around. Any framework that doesn't let us question the assumptions of the plan silences all those critiques of colonialism, which ensures politics is only overwhelmed by its nationalist orientation, which guts any argument they have about being able to change the political or access that. Lastly, their perfcon argument, Doug did not explain how it's a performative contradiction with the economy. Obviously, we can make an disadvantage to the economy when the AF has presented an advantage relating to the economy, while also saying that colonialism is still bad and that we should let indigenous people manage their own resources. Permutation.
First, it's either severance or intrinsic. It severs out of the initial political subjectivity they co-sign. Defending that is necessary for the reading of their scholarship. Otherwise, it destroys the ability for us to win because of AF shiftiness, which is the impact to those types of firms. That makes being neg impossible and guts debatability by allowing the AF to move out of whatever possible link we could generate. Secondly, our Chen 13 alt card proves mutual exclusivity. There's a different starting point from our alternative to the AF. We separate local and indigenous politics in the context of water from the bounds of the imperial nation state, because otherwise they get subsumed into reformism that co-ops us and guts solvency. We coalesce movements that draw from anti-colonial groups like the Zapatistas and Chiapas water protection, including tactics like leading by obeying, which has historically maximized the outreach of anti-colonial coalitions that make global organizing more effective. Third, co-option dissad. Too many tactors fracture struggle. The AF invites colonizers to the table both ideologically and material, which imposes inertia onto revolutionary movements and kills the momentum by turning would-be revolutionaries into political figures that postpone structural change in favor of short-term winnable policy reforms, which guts any chance for a truly better interconnected world. Their next argument on the let us dump somewhere else. Our response to the plan is just relatively a drop in the bucket, and that indigenous sovereignty solves the impact, because obviously corporations wouldn't be able to dump elsewhere if people had autonomy over their own land, which is the necessary prerequisite that Doug can't recognize, because it assumes that people are just able to have access to the land, which is the colonial assumption that we live under. Lastly, the alt can't solve. Yes, it does. Winning any of our links and impacts means that the AF has reified an incorrect orientation in regards to water, which means only rethinking water's agential capacity can solve. This proper orientation to water and the environment writ large is the necessary prerequisite for a properly politically educated organizing group that culminates into a more green politics that does the actual groundwork necessary for the AF to work and dismembers colonialism in favor of an interdependent indigenous sovereign world that focuses on environmental autonomy and sovereignty of the water. And in addition to this, there's also a state bad question that they've obfuscated. It's harder to create solidarity in the world of the AF when people are ideologically split across the yes-no question of state being good, which is the uniqueness question of where do we start our politics. Their reform only encourages disjointed politics that prevents scaling upwards on a local level. This link not only turns case by gutting solvency by preventing real sustainability, but also turns case by accessing climate change. Endorsing an approach based on environmental resiliency makes action against climate change immensely harder, because they don't change consumption patterns or how we orient ourselves to the environment, nor do they actually hold corporations accountable for their emissions, and discourages people from actually making change by a renewed liberal investment in how we can be resilient and keep creating reforms to stave off climate change. Now, on the case environment advantage. Extend fair 19, there's alternative causes to soil and water pollution. Farming and pesticides wash into waterways with eroded sediments that create dead zones, killing aquatic life. Improper disposal of waste contributes way more to water pollution than a few instances of drilling. Even if they win, fracking is obviously not good for the environment. They may stake one instance of how we damage the environment for a structural disavowal of the environment. Next. There's no relationship between survival and biodiversity. Humans can survive post-earthworm collapse. Their authors use flawed data analysis in their regression analysis that reads complex amalgamations of how our human health interacts with the environment and turns them into basic linear relationships. Essentially, the variables they choose to record flattens the way they view the system, which means they can only measure certain indicators of biodiversity, which is an extremely flawed way of checking whether we've hit the bright line for biodiversity collapse. Lastly, RF cites numerous studies with competing findings to theirs across the globe and different samples that suggest there's no causal link or even direct correlation between biodiversity and human health. Lastly, natural pandemics don't cause human extinction. Extend Farquhar 17. Mammals have never historically died out from any zoonotic or other deadly spreadable viruses. This is because there's a trade-off. The stronger the virus is, as its strength and contagion rises, so does its mortality, which means it ends up killing hosts faster than it can spread. This is why coronavirus was such a high spreader, because it was in the maximum spread range with a mortality rate of around and under 5%, which affected people just enough to make it deadly and noticeable, but not enough that it couldn't spread fast. The Doug speculating in cross-ex that new diseases will come from fracking does not rise to the burden of proof that we would spawn a super new contagious disease that's so incredibly contagious and deadly that all of humanity would go extinct and no previous medicines or vaccines we have would work. Any claim like that is asinine and is not supported by the evidence that they've read in the advantage. Yeah, that's time. Give me a second to grab water.
Yeah, no worries. Let me know when you're good.
All right, I'm ready for CrossFit.
Okay. Why is resiliency bad?
Resiliency is bad because it trades actual organizing out in favor of like short-term winnable reforms that are like, instead of structurally resolving how we consume things, how we let corporations run amok on the world over like other people's land, we just like find a way to live through the next environmental thing.
Okay.
Short term.
So I guess what's the connection between being resilient and an increase in policing then?
Well, our argument is that the ability, specifically the way the plan does it through like allows bureaucrats to enter indigenous communities, because the way that they determine what
Wait, hold up a second. Are bureaucrats already in indigenous communities? Like, isn't there already fracking on indigenous?
I mean, sure, colonialism happens right now, but the plan uniquely creates a new law that is a new political mobilization. Like, in order for you to solve your impacts, you have to insert new people into communities to regulate water, which is like what your public disclosure part of your plan text operates off.
Okay, that makes some sense to me. Let's talk about the alternative. I guess you've like built it up for some sort of lofty goals. How does it remove wasteful water? Like,
how does the alt remove wasteful water? We think that different indigenous communities have different relationships to the water that they do. So different answers. But B, we've referenced groups like the Zapatistas who are able to do that. The Zapatistas, for example, the way that they orient themselves in the Chiapas has enabled them to like clean up their own water supply without national oversight. And we think
okay, why do these groups have a better idea of the agential capacity of water?
Because top-down state reform pre-assumes a sort of colonial management.
I'm not asking about top-down state reform. I'm asking about the way these groups like view water. What about their view makes water agential?
Well, what about their view makes water agential? Because they coexist with water rather than simply consuming as much water as possible and then regulating that afterwards. They like actually change the way they consume water.
So why is removing waste and making it so fracking has to like indicate that it's polluting a place incommensurate with that idea of water?
Well, our argument is that state reform is incommensurate with letting indigenous people manage their own water, because that state reform requires people.
Like, can indigenous, I guess, are you going to claim that the alternative can have indigenous folks advocate for the plan? Like, what if they want this?
Well, our argument is that regardless of whether you can find some indigenous people that like state reform.
All right, so you said there's a perverse perspective. How do you determine which indigenous folks' perspective is the proper agential one?
Through a structural analysis that determines colonialism and top-down nationalist, implementation of water policy is bad. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Now it's the 1 in R. I'm going to go on the CP, do the condo stuff, and then I'm going to go on the disadvantage, the econ disadvantage. So, yeah, I'm going to start in 10 seconds.
Do not start yet, Irshad.
Oh, do not start? All right.
You said condo, econ, right?
Yep.
Right, now I'm good.
All right. Our interpretation is we get one conditional CP and one conditional critique and the status quo. First, that's key to negative flexes. Add-ons, infinite prep, and strategic bias for the AF means the neg needs an option. Dispositionality or unconditionality allows the AF to sandbag offense and add-ons, crushes strategic planning. B, dispo doesn't solve. Perms versus no perms means that it does the exact same thing, and there's no bright line for what constitutes dispositionality, and the ability for it to mutate into conditionality means it relinks. C, there's no impact. Time skew and strat skew are inevitable. The 1 in C is 8 minutes of argumentation, regardless, which all needs to be answered by the 2AC, and advocacies aren't uniquely more responsibility worthy than a disad T or case args. D, 2 is a predictable bright line. That's at most 1 for each advocacy type, which resolves any residual offense or strat skew claims they have. The disad. The disad outweighs in Turn's case. First, environment. Economic decline takes alternative energy methods. TOKIC 12. Environmental issues would be less important during the economic implosion, which would delay alternative energy. Oil would be correct. Lower prices would put climate issues on the back burner and limit the development of alt energy projects. Economic implosion would be a net negative for ecological concerns, this time even more damaging for the environment. Two, the economy. The plan's environmental and water regulations gut business confidence by imposing financial burdens through taxes, yielded labor through adhering to said regulations, and incurring fixed costs on businesses, which hurts their performance and results in the overall economic decline that triggers the AF's own scenarios of nuclear war and economic decline from the 1AC, and also domestically spills up to international tension that end in warfare and escalation, like the AF's own impacts. Three, solvency. Increasing regs overburdens agencies, which hurts enforcement and disincentivizes self-imposed conservation. Lee 21. Expanding the CWA would have dire policy implications. Permitting requirements would lead to duplicative permitting, and overburden agencies would disincentivize the implementation of voluntary conservation practices and weaken regulated entities. Now, on the line by line. First, their argument about uniqueness, confidence being right now, low right now. The AF is wrong about the scope. The economy is doing well right now. The Archaney Camp on 627 have post-dates theirs, and she's an economic specific reporter who holds relatively more expertise in how the economy is doing now. Biden's first 6 months focus on rising business investment and business confidence, shown one, quantitatively by orders for non-defense goods rising back to their highest levels in 30 years and manufacturing output numbers on the rise, and two, qualitatively shown by decreased tensions between the US and China, which revitalizes trade, which means there's reasons that business confidence is high right now, and business confidence and business and consumer confidence are recovering now, but there's still risks. Davidson and Petrus 427. Job growth and retail pointed to a booming economy. Americans are flush with an additional 2.4 trillion. Biden improving consumer and business confidence. There's still risk, and so business confidence are returning the economy to normal, but there's still a long way to go. Supply chain quarterly 21. Businesses gained enough confidence in the nation's economic recovery during the second quarter of 2021. BSI rose. BSI is a predictive measure of business confidence and future economic opportunity based on willingness of business to spend. Output on a path to return to normal. The BSI shows the economy is far from fully recovered. Their next argument is the link turn, that having clear government regulations lets us have business confidence. Wrong. Uncertainty doesn't damage growth. Regulation does. The plan actualizes the prospect of regulation. Economist 11. It is not uncertainty that bothers business. Business prefers zero probability of a burdensome rule, but if that's not possible, it would take 50% over 100%. Delay of the standard perpetuates uncertainty. Business welcomed it because they do not have the much money to spend it, and perhaps forever. And the link is based on perception. Even if when regs are good in theory, businesses still lose confidence as a result. Applebaum and Tankersley 18. Executives are largely convinced that the cost of complying diverts money that would be invested. Economists see a connection between prune rulebook and the willingness of business to crank open their vaults. What does matter is confidence. If the expectations are positive, it does make a difference. And next argument about fracking causing shocks. Fracking regulations ripple across the economy, cost trillions, and affects every industry. Businesses hate it. Herring 19. Fracking policy devastates the economies, lose 19 million jobs, reduce GDP by 7 trillion, and cause gas prices to quadruple. Effects would be widespread across the U.S. economy. Would also reduce consumer spending and slow hiring, increasing energy costs. Manufacturing would be especially hard to hit. And additionally, it destroys confidence. Shank 17. A ban on fracking would shake business confidence. Would cost $8.8 billion, likely much more. There would be material impacts. Now, lastly, on the no BizCon internal link and their argument that it's just a feeling. Business confidence is necessary for economic repair and is the main correlating internal link to determine whether the economy does well or not. This is because business confidence goes up when there's increased investment spending and less regulation, which allows for businesses to not only better navigate monetary risk, but means that there's better assessment and consumer prediction, which allows for an overall smoother functioning of markets. And business confidence drives economic recovery. Mortgage Medics 21. When businesses feel confident, they will invest in both equipment and new members of the staff. The government needs to rebuild not just the economy, but our confidence in the economy. And business confidence drives growth. Wall Street Journal 16. Job numbers tend to be a lagging economic indicator. Overriding problem continues to be a lack of business confidence and investment, which leads to slower growth, which gives the U.S. economy a lower margin for absorbing growth shocks from around the world. Yeah, I got 5 seconds left. That was everything on the disad. So, yeah.
Great. I'm going to start my prep time now. Great, I'm stopping prep with about 4.5 minutes to use.
Sounds good.
Save and send this out. All right, it is sent out. All right, my roadmap is going to be the environment advantage. Then I am going to the economy advantage, the economy disadvantage, the counter plan, and then the K. Cool.
I'm all set.
Sounds good. Let me just get my timer up for this. Cool. All right. Indiscriminate fracking causes environmental collapse. It destroys the carrying capacity for soil, devastating keystone species such as earthworms, and a lack of these species means no agriculture and extinction. New pollutants exponentially increase the discovery of disease. No one expected COVID either, yet here we are for the second year doing debate camp on Zoom, which is the reason why you should prefer our impact. A new disease on top of another one would be exponentially worse. It causes the only form of extinction that we've seen is when overlapping diseases occur and none of their evidence gets to the threshold. It's from 2017 and doesn't assume new pandemics. On the agriculture stuff, none of their evidence says that agriculture dead zones are irreversible. Fracking waste takes thousands of years to clean, and the water in current tech is ill-equipped. The waste warrant is solved because we regulate it with best practices and create standards to measure whether or not corporations are living up to good faith. The econ advantage, they have conceded the full weight of our uniqueness scenario. The only sustainable turn to long-term growth is by locking in a green transition. Only the plan is capable of breaking up fracking enough to ensure its success and transition to things like solar and wind energy, like Texas has been. Economic decline causes nuclear war and terrorism and turns every single one of their impacts. The economy disadvantage at the top, the turns case arguments. There are no environmental terms. Fracking is a systemic risk from stranded assets and endlessly kicks green tech down the road in favor of visual mist. The market must be pushed out to actualize green energy and is the only capacity to be able to solve the environment while maintaining a good economy. There is no capital flight or lack of enforcement. Burke in 2000. Concerns about domestic economic growth are inexorably tied to those about international competitiveness and environmental regulation has no significant effect on the next exports, although international trade patterns suggest the migration of dirty industries to less developed countries. There is little evidence that Burke can be attributed to the relatively lax regulatory standards rather than the progression through standard stages of development. Similarly, data on foreign investment, direct investment does not indicate significant capital flight due to environmental regulation. Disease turns the disadvantage. It destroys the economy. COVID-19 proves it. A second disease would be even worse for it. We're still living in the aftermath of that sluggish growth, which is the reason why you should prefer it over vague hits that the fracking industry might take. Economic reporters are just BuzzFeed bloggers for the economy. All of it is speculative. Transportation infrastructure, public comments on green energy and fracking have already shook BizCon. The Delta variant is making it so businesses are already worried. That thumps the link and uniqueness controls the direction for how you would determine magnitude. More evidence, confidence is low, and regulations are expected. Nolan in 20. In the wake of Biden's election, CEO confidence fell sharply. Confidence for the current environment's little change outlook fell 6% this month, along those single month declines of the past 5 years. CEOs feared to increase tax regulations under Biden. New regulations were the main reasons behind downgrade in the business environment. Expect a more difficult economy due to the increases in regulation, and specifically small business optimism, which is key to the economy, is super low. Matthews in 21. Small businesses are the backbone of the economy. 50% of labor force is employed by small business. Optimism declined significantly. The lowest reading of optimism since May 2020, as we had a second wave of COVID-19, and extend our link turn the plan solve valves by creating certainty through regulations. It doesn't ban fracking, which is the scenario that most of their link evidence assumes, but heavily regulates it. It has no financial long-term benefits. Fracking is screwed until 2025. Hemp in 25. Demand for fracking will not return pre-pandemic until 2025. Recovery will be slow and painful, and fracking can't turn a profit. McDonald in 20. Fracking is only feasible because of higher prices. Prices fall into the lower end levels in decades. As a cause of coronavirus restrictions, Japan will plummet. 20% companies are under a dead not one of the hunters lodgers operation can turn a profit. The counterplan, extend conditionality of the voting issue for fairness in education. They create less rigorous examination, minimizes 2AC options because they can pick out of turns to suck up add-ons, all of which crush critical thinking. One option solves deaths, don't prefer negative flexibility, disadd and tease checks debate, solves ideological extremism. Apps will be tested in different ways in different rounds. DAs don't make time and strat too inevitable. We can read add-ons versus the status quo, and it takes 0 time to read bad team args. Reject the team, the damage done. We can't re-give the 2AC in. Irshad didn't answer the perfcon standard, just proved the link argument by explaining it. It's a reason why if you link, you lose for framework. You should throw out their framework argument because they linked in the one in C. Onto the K now, extend our interpretation. The plan is the focus of the debate. It's the only sustainable metric which maintains a balance of prep. Anything else is self-serving and skirts the burden of joint or fairness. Alternative frameworks debate 8 minutes about steps without engaging the consequences of the plan. All links should be measured by specificity to the outcome of the plan. Second is topic education. Water policy is unique and important. They paint it with broad brushes, which gets out of it. Resiliency has no impact outside of policing. Some resiliency might be good for communities dealing with waste now. Policing is non-unique. Unregulated fracking increases structural and domestic violence, and the alt has an even worse chance of ending fracking with the plan, making the argument work. Extend the permutation. It's not severance, just the whole plan, not the alt. Reject the argument, not the team. Think of it as two-track solution. Government reform with local grassroots. The alternative has no hope of answering it. There are a million different perspectives of indigenous people out there that are contradicting that it can't actualize.
Okay, I'm going to do prep again, and I'm going to narrate. I'll be a little less time this time, but basically, I do not have a 2NR doc because I was planning on going for the disadd and kind of just giving it on the flow, which is primarily on the flow, but I will write up an overview, which is what I'm planning on doing. Now, just one thing I want to talk about quickly. I would have normally gone for the K because I'm a K debater, and that's I would have gone for framework specifically on the K, but for y'all, I want to give a 2NR on the disadd to show y'all specifically that. And yeah, so first argument on the econ disadd is I've conceded that green transition is necessary to solve the economy. The second argument, I'm just gonna map out the arguments first before I go on the responses. The second argument is basically answering the turns case argument. Yeah, just answering the basically turns case argument. So I just need to re-articulate in the context of those arguments. So again, first argument, green transition necessary. Writing that down. Second argument answers turns case. Second set of arguments, I guess, answers turns case. Third argument, disease turns econ. I imagine this is very likely going to be a big part of the 2AR. So yeah, and makes the economy slow. The fourth set of arguments, which was like 4 or 5 arguments, was simply that BizCon is shook by Delta, confidence is low now, small business optimism low now. Basically, these are, as I see it, uniqueness arguments about whether or not business confidence is high now. So I just need to make business confidence high now arguments. And lastly, the last set of arguments, like the McDonald 2020 card and the not banning fracking card, can't turn a profit. Those are all fracking, like the fracking turn stuff. So those are as I see it, the 5 things I need to answer on the disadd. I also am planning on going for a case so I can, get some impact D specifically to these impacts, which Doug is planning on going for specifically. So just on the top level, here's the way that I'm framing the 2NR. You always need a way to write your judge's ballot and give them sentences that they can either say in the RFD or understand the debate through. So I am going to go for the disadd does turn case, which means I need to answer these disease impacts and do impact calc at the top for impact calculus at the top for impact calc at the top for the disadd outweighing and turning case. Sorry, I'm gonna actually stop share for a second, because I'm not gonna do much. But so I'm going to do impact calculus at the top for how the what is it? Man, what was I saying? I'm doing impact calculus at the top for why not only the economy does better than the environment advantage, but specifically, I need to compare our econ advantage or our econ disadvantage to Doug's econ solvency, which will happen on the green transition part on the flow. The specific way I'm talking about is not only is green transition not necessary, but just specifically indicting the warrants that Doug has used for why green transition is necessary. And basically about how green energy is necessary for the markets, right? Second argument I need to make about how, basically markets do not correlate to environmental change. Most businesses are unrelated to what happens in terms of green growth. Growth can be low without being green. History proves that, and the fact that we can shift between decline and growth, in my opinion, disproves this argument. So yeah, that's the way I'm approaching that. And then I'm using that to set up impact calculus arguments about how the econ scenario that we've isolated, which is through business confidence, which is what you'll be hearing a lot in the 2NR for impact calculus, business confidence matters more than green growth. That is kind of the sort of closest thing to impact calc that BizCon outweighs green growth. In my opinion, this is the way that our econ scenarios differentiate, and thus the way that I do impact calc. Second argument about, regulations don't cause capital flight. I will simply just break down why regulations hurt BizCon specifically, and then talk about like how that imposes burdens on businesses, for example, right? To answer the turns case argument, the main turns case argument I want is that regulations on a top government regulations on corporations managing water will significantly hurt the economy, which means that they lose their econ disadvantage. That is the implication of this argument, right? Next, the disease stuff. They talk about how disease makes the economy slow. And the main thing Doug's isolated here is the Delta stuff, or like how the pandemic slowed down. I'm simply going to dispute that it was specifically the disease part as opposed to other aspects of that time that lowered the growth. Things like people not being able to, the fact that that was our first pandemic that we hadn't adapted. I'll make arguments like, the fact that we're now all used to online stuff and labor in the face of pandemics checks in the future, for example. I think that's a good argument, I guess. I don't know, the fact that the future pandemics won't hit as hard as this one, basically, in terms of how it shocked our system. Which basically takes out his analysis of how like COVID worked, because it's like, well, that won't happen again in the future because we can basically adapt. And then real quickly on the last two stuff, uniqueness stuff, I just need to answer BizCon is shaken by Delta. I'll simply make arguments about like how the vaccine breakthrough cases are, extremely rare, and vaccines are still, like, people are still getting vaxxed more and more. The CDC said that we don't need our masks. All these sorts of things means that business confidence is high, because regardless of whether they might be a little bit scared of whether Delta will affect their businesses, for the foreseeable future, the government has said that it's okay for us to go out in public if we're vaccinated, which means business operations are probably going to continue and be fine. And also, this Matthews card is from March. That was literally pre-vax, which means it doesn't apply. Yeah, and the Nolan 20 card is also pre-vax. Then the only card that's in the context is the Rosenbaum 21, which is talking about how there's other factors for business confidence, like partisanship, inflation. I'm just specifically going to, again, extend like the BizCon explanation that I have to do at the top of the flow for impact calculus for why BizCon is the key internal link. So yeah. And then lastly, fracking turn, I'm just going to they talk about how fracking is screwed till 2025, and fracking basically does not turn a profit. I will simply re-extend my arguments about how, you know, fracking specifically this Herring 19 card, because I think it's pretty good. It cites a lot of studies, GDP numbers, it forecasts job loss. And yeah, I think it does beat the cards, in fact. And yeah, so that is my map for the 2NR. Yeah, give me like 1 second to just put all my stuff together that I want, and then I will be able to give the speech.
Before you begin, Victoria looks like that she had a question.
Oh yeah, for sure. Let's do questions now while I'm.
I was wondering, can you put the notes in the chat? You're talking too fast. I'm trying to keep
Oh,
up.
sorry. Yeah, I get it. Yeah. So yeah, I'll just quickly write out what I said.
Thank
Just as a quick comment also for everyone else, I can imagine, and I know that this entire debate and all of it can definitely be overwhelming. There was a lot of arguments made. There was a lot of content. There was a lot of evidence that was read. So don't feel like you did wrong because you did not catch every argument. Like in debate, it happens. Even the most experienced debaters sometimes either like miss arguments or they don't write down like everything. So, you know, this is just a practice and a demonstration. So if anybody feels like, you know, you'll be tested afterwards or something like that, like don't feel overwhelmed or worried that you didn't catch everything, right? This is just practice.
And let me just type this last part in, and then I'll be pretty much done. Oh, sorry. One last thing I forgot to mention. I do need to answer condo. I'm just going to extend my condo answers and do a little bit of impact calc. But yeah, yeah. I'm simply going to reread mostly what I like, re-articulate my warrants from the truancy.
Okay. So yeah. Oh, yeah.
Are you gonna need a lot of prepper shot after this, or are you gonna be pretty good?
I'm done now. I'm done now.
Okay, cool.
I know it's like 12:50, but yeah, I am basically done. So yeah, let me get my phone out. And yep, no problem. So it is going to be, I'm going to start with condo. And I'll address the perf con arguments there too. Then after condo and perf con, I am planning on going for case arguments. And then I'm planning on going for disad arguments. So the case specifically environment advantage stuff. So yeah, is everybody good? All right, sounds good. Starting in 10 seconds. All right. On condo, our interpretation is that we get one conditional counterplay and one conditional critique and the status quo. They dropped our neg flex standard, which means that things like infinite prep and strategic bias, the app getting to speak first and last, means we need to be able to test the app from multiple angles, and nothing about dispositionality in the 1AR is able to solve it. This crushes all of our strategic planning. Dispositionality does not solve, which means they don't get access to any impact calc because nothing about their model resolves it. Just perms versus no perms being the only distinction means that debate is functionally the same in the world of the app. Lastly, there is no impact. They've dropped that all time skew and strat skew is inevitable. Doug has to give a 2AC that responds to the 8 minutes worth of argumentation I presented in the 1C, regardless of whether it's 0, 1, or 2 advocacies. And lastly, 2 is a predictable bright line. It maximizes clash, which allows me to go for critiques that challenge the underlying assumptions of the plan, while also going for counterplan arguments that solve the advantages and relate to the economy and environment of the plan, and allow me to test from 2 different angles, while also not overburdening Doug with having several different critiques and counterplans to go for, which means there is no impact. Negative flex outweighs any fairness skew or skew impact that you can go for, because in a world where we get neg flex, that is a better world than one in which the app is slightly harder for the app to it is slightly harder for the app because they have prep that balances out, but we have nothing that checks conversely. PerfCon, Doug didn't explain how the critique and the counterplan performatively contradict. I didn't answer this here, but I did on the critique in the 2NC, which means that you don't grant them PerfCon because, simply put, they didn't understand how our indict of colonialism, it contradicts with any impact about how we should care about how the economy is going. Those are not 2 inherently biased things, especially when our links on the case were specific to the actual mechanism of the plan, which did not contradict with the counterplan. Critique, kicking it, concede the perm, no residual offense that applies to the case or DA on the case. First, fracking is not the only way that climate change happens. There's several dropped other ways that water pollution happens, ways that farming and pesticides can wash into waterways, improper disposal of waste that contributes way more. Even if they win, fracking is not good for the environment. There's several other things that are not good for the environment, which means they probably don't solve climate change in a world where there's several businesses running amok over how the environment works and not accessing that. Secondly, disease impact is way overstated. There's never been any mammal that has gone extinct through diseases, and even when bacteria was worse off in the ice age, and they don't have vaccines. All of those our cites numerous studies with competing findings to theirs across the globe in different samples that suggest there is no causal or even direct correlation between bio decline and human health, or how there's stronger viruses are not able to spread faster. Doug dropped the entire analysis about how a higher mortality rate leads to an inversely lower spreading rate, which means that there is no disease that could possibly exist that would spread and kill people. Lastly, biodiversity does not correlate to human health. Again, our evidence cites that numerous numbers that show that there's no correlation between these two. It postdates theirs as better and more numerous studies across the world, which is what they need to win an extinction impact for. Now, the disad. Okay, first, business confidence is what matters most. It's necessary for economic repair and the main correlating internal link to determine whether the economy does well or not, because business confidence goes up when there's increased investment spending and less regulation that allows for businesses to navigate things like monetary risks, better assessment, better consumer prediction, and smoother functioning of the market. Their second argument is which outweighs all of our econ decline impacts. Link can be cross-applied from the 1AR's impacts about econ decline spilling up to nuclear war, and means we get access to all those impacts, and it does turn their impacts. The future regulations do hurt business confidence. Burdensome regulations make business performance go down by imposing new regulations, new labor, new time that the business has to put in to match these regulations to ensure that they're not caught. And future pandemics won't affect business performance nearly as much, since we've already gone through a pandemic and can adapt, which means their disease turns case arguments is not a winning 2AR frame. Green growth is not necessary in order to have growth. Growth doesn't have to be green in order to avoid economic decline, which is all we need to avoid our impacts. Secondly, they're making a big uniqueness push, which honestly in the grander scheme of the debate doesn't matter. Businesses, we are still outside and businesses are open, so confidence is somewhat high, which means that even if they win that businesses are confidence is mildly low now, they still wreck it, and severely, because the scale of the link has not been disputed by the AF. Lastly, their fracking arguments don't matter. Banning fracking would devastate the economy, destroying 19 million jobs, which is drop one, and reduce the GDP by 7 trillion, causing gas prices to go way up because we can't get it domestically and have to import now, which is a big economic impact. Again, incurring fixed costs on businesses, hurting performance. Business confidence is the main thing that is necessary for economic growth. Yeah, vote neg.
Great. I won't try to keep us too past the start of lunchtime, so I'll go right into my speech. The order is going to be the environment advantage, the econ advantage, and then the econ disadvantage. Okay, let me just get this organized. All right, cool. Environmental collapse is the biggest impact in the round, the only thing that's external from the economy, which means you should view it as a tiebreaker when the econ debate inevitably starts to get confusing. There are two certainties. One, indiscriminate fracking dramatically increases pollution, hampering soil and carrying capacity for local environments. That threatens keystone species like earthworms. This dramatically outweighs any of their impacts on probability. It's like Jenga. Removing one species from the tower can cause the entire thing to collapse. It outweighs on magnitude. Even if we could survive post-collapse, it would be an apocalypse on scale of Cormac McCarthy's The Road. We would be much more well-equipped to survive an economic collapse or war than we would an entire collapse of our ecosystems and biodiversity. Second certainty, disease. Even if it doesn't cause extinction, every future pandemic should have an elevated risk in your mind. COVID is not the plague, but it wrecked the global economy. Future pandemics may be even more lethal, so it's not worthwhile to gamble on it. Irshad may sound good and persuasive in the 2NR that we've learned from the previous mistakes, but we didn't learn from the Spanish flu in our anticipation of COVID-19, which means you should always err towards minimizing risks of encountering new diseases as an unequivocal good. Our evidence describes that compounding diseases on top of one another is the more likely scenario for an extinction level event. So it's like having a double dip on diseases. It's COVID mixed mixed with whatever new stuff we find due to fracking, which is exponentially scarier. The only arguments that are really relevant here are the alternative causes. None of their alternative causes amounts to the scale of fracking, though. They have cited things like runoffs from agriculture, which are easier to be cleaned than fracking pollution. They have cited things such as waste, which we have solved back through our waste disposal regimes, which they have no solvency deficits against or any response to within this debate, giving you a 100% certainty that the plan is at least a good step towards resolving soil stuff. Even if we can't solve climate change writ large, which is the only way that this is warranted out, there is certainty that the affirmative is able to at least even out soil health, the economy advantage. There are two important arguments that I'm going to extend here that frame the entirety of the disadvantage. First, the current recovery needs something for growth to hang on to for sustainable long-term investments and to sustain a good trajectory. The fossil fuel economy is the wrong bet towards getting us towards sustainable growth in the long term. It will create stranded assets and may create multiple instances in which companies go bankrupt overnight because fossil fuels will no longer be the maker for it. Previous transitions in Texas prove that it's feasible. All of their green jobs represent almost twice as much as the next four sectors combined for their state, which is a feasible model for the entire nation. Second, fracking exemptions are actively delaying the transition to renewable energy. It makes it unlikely that we'll be able to get there in long term and makes it so that the bridge fuel hype myth is what constrains us in the long term. On to the economy disadvantage. A lot of the stuff at the top is not super duper important. Disease massively outweighs and turns the case. As I already said above, it shreks the global economy and makes it so trade and all other feasible standards are impossible. The only link argument that they sort of have is about businesses getting upset, but they have not responded to the fact that Biden is already pro-environmental or green regulations. What is the bright line for these previous regulations versus the plan? They claim that we haven't attacked the link threshold, but this is what these thumpers are about. Biden has already come out in favor of regulations. How do you differentiate the plan from Biden's transportation infrastructure plans? How do you differentiate the plan from Biden's new regulations in the attempt to handle Delta? All of these things should have made businesses amply upset or prove that they aren't upset enough to cause the impact that they're going for. Additionally, they have conceded the argument that regulations at the very least create a more certain environment for businesses to operate in. Sure, they may be upset at the short-term costs of a regulation, but knowing the long-term trajectory of the economy will make them more likely to spend dollars. This is especially true because the 2NR does not breathe a word on the 1AR evidence about fracking not being able to come back to its economic capacity until at least 2025, which means that they gamble the entirety of the economy on 4 years in which we can't be able to do it. The McDonald evidence indicates that there is no way for them to turn a profit. So even if the businesses are confident in the economy, they're not going to have the investments to do any of the good things that Irshad says they'll be able to do in the 2NR, which means the only bet is to move towards a green sustainable transition. And that's the only possible through the plan. All right.
Great debate.
Good debate. Good debate. All right. I know that we went up to the time, so I don't want to keep folks too long for a debrief. Thank you all for listening to us. I hope that you all got something out of Irshad narrating some of his prep stuff. I hope that there was some stuff that made it a little bit easier for you to understand how to navigate online debate. If you want to, during the lunchtime, definitely vote, and we can make a poll to be able to do that as well. So definitely keep the debate in your mind.
Awesome. Yeah, so we will make the poll for if you think the affirmative or the negative one, and then that will be the first thing we do before we break into lab groups to give you all a little bit of time to think about your reason for decision and how you would vote in this round.